NRL Offside is back. We are back for another week, Johnny. And, mate, as we did last week, we are going to bring the outro to the intro again. Mate, it worked an absolute treat with last week's episode. So we're going to do a repeat performance. We're going to start by asking all of our listeners to subscribe. So, guys, whatever platform you're listening on, be it Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Deezer, make sure you just go to the bottom of the screen, click on the little subscribe button. It'll mean that we hit your feed bright and early on release on Wednesday. Also, don't forget to join us on the socials. Johnny, there's been some very, very exciting development with our socials, but we've got our Instagram handle at NRL_offside and our TikTok handle, which is at NRL Offside. And speaking of Instagram, Johnny, mate, last week it was very, very exciting. We are starting to explore new territory here on NRL Offside. And, mate, we had our first almost live feed. So we threw to Allianz Stadium just before the Roosters-Bulldogs game. Mate, we got to have a chat with you. You were very, very excited. You're going to be talking about where you were in a moment. But it also got us a fair bit of exposure. Now, mate, I was sitting at the dinner table on Sunday night and my daughter said that one of her friends had actually sent the clip to her and said, "Is this your dad?" Now, in typical daughter style, she was mortally embarrassed. But, mate, I think that's what the kiddies call, I think that's what the kiddies call viral or what? Do you have, mate?
What? Not, you don't mean a virus.
Mate, it was probably closer to a virus than viral, but, mate, well, whatever the case, our Instagram account is going from strength to strength. But, mate, we better have our A game this week. We've likely got a few more new listeners, so we want to make sure that we impress them. Not sure we're doing that with this introduction. And speaking of success, mate, last week you invented a whole new concept. Mate, I don't even think you knew about it. And, mate, it also came from one of the most unlikely of inspirations, which was the Titans-Cowboy game preview. In fact, mate, I enjoyed that game. It was probably the only positive that actually came from those two teams running around. And, mate, that was the new saying that you coined, which was the round of the game. Now, the round of the game, mate, I think that term is going to enter the common vernacular, JC. Mate, it's going to end up like the state of play or the rub of the green or Royale with cheese. Mate, I'm not entirely sure what it means. Mate, as is usually the case, my dear friend, mate, you are playing 3D chess. I'm merely fumbling with the checkers pieces. But, mate, I love it. Absolutely love it. The round of the game. Mate, it almost has a Zen-like quality. It's sort of like a Buddhist or a Confucian saying. So, Johnny, mate, what is the round of the game this week with you?
Mate, g'day, Noz, and hello, listeners. Look, very funny, Noz. I noticed you've named today's episode after my recent clanger. I actually think it's my best to date. That's for sure. Round of the game, and obviously thanks to Johnny Croak for picking that one up. Anyway, look, I'm good. By the way, I'm still coming down from the VIP experience that I had at the Roosters versus Dogs game last Friday night. Many thanks to the boys from Hublot. It was a fantastic night. Very glad the Chooks managed to get the 2 points in the end. Probably a little lucky, if I'm being fair. And as you said, I hope our live cross from the game came out all right. I did notice, Noz, you did give it a pretty big upload on our socials. So, thanks. Instagram was definitely a little bit of fun. And, mate, enough of the intro stuff. Mate, over to you, Captain Noz, for the first big hitter.
Now, we've got our usuals this week, guys. We've got speed round, what caught our eye, the round preview, vox popping, plenty of great things to talk about in those segments. In the spirit of deep thinking, Johnny, we have a thought experiment this week for the Grapple. And freeballing comes back to me for part 2 of team building. That may well be the point of the program where the deep thinking stops, but interesting all the same. I would encourage everybody to stick around for that. But Johnny, mate, can you feel it? Can you feel it?
I feel the need for speed. Ow! I feel the need for speed.
Let's start with the Titans versus the Cowboys. Look, the Titans were so disappointing in this match. The Cowboys absolutely rolled through them. And look, after their poor performance last week, they needed to respond. And I actually thought they went all right. The Cows played some pretty good football, and more importantly, they've kept their top 8 chances well and truly alive. In fact, I'm going to make the call right now. I think the Cowboys will definitely play finals football this year. As for the Titans, look, not much more to say from me. Another disappointing season, particularly when you judge them on the most important stat of all, mate, wins and losses. I don't think they've really gone forward much at all this year under new coach Hannay.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move to the Warriors versus the Panthers. Great result from the Warriors. They came out flying out of the blocks. And look, at one stage, I actually led Penrith 22-0. Mate, they were all over the Panthers early and played some seriously good football. Then, as you'd expect, we saw the Panthers fight back, but in the end, it sort of came a little bit too late. The Warriors were simply too big, too strong, and pretty much too good on the day. And I tell you what, the Warriors at home are going to be bloody difficult to beat, especially if they finish inside the top 2 and obviously get a home final. For Penrith, look, it now sets up a mouth-watering clash against my Roosters this coming Thursday. So watch this space. All right, mate, let's go to the Roosters versus the Bulldogs. Look, mate, I'll start by saying, pity the VIP Hublot offside experience at Allianz. It didn't quite match the action on the field. I didn't think it was a great spectacle, to be honest, with both teams really guilty of poor handling, lots of errors and plenty of missed opportunities. In the first half, I really felt the Chooks probably should have led by more. Mate, we had so many opportunities on the Dogs' trial line, but just couldn't convert them into points. And then the Dogs came out firing in the second half and quickly turned the game around to lead actually 18-8. And I'll be honest, with about 12 or 13 minutes ago, I really thought the Dogs had this game won. And then we saw a crazy 5-minute period. Suddenly the Roosters found another gear, scored twice, and then hit the front. 2018 and somehow managed to hold the Dogs out to grab what was a pretty unexpected win in the end. I don't think anyone really stood out from either side. Probably maybe Billy the Kid Smith was probably the best player on the ground. And look, as a Chooks fan, I'm just happy we got the 2 points. For the Dogs, though, that was a big missed opportunity to really cement themselves inside the top 8. Let's move to the Storm versus the Seagulls. Mate, I'm gonna start by saying what I've been saying the last few weeks. Fozball is dead, and Isball is well and truly alive. As you know, that's been my constant message about the Eagles now for a while. And look, it's not changing. What a disappointing 6 to 8 weeks it's been for Manly, culminating in an embarrassing 42-20 loss to the Storm over in Perth, especially after getting out to an early lead. I think they were leading 14-0 at one stage. But look, well done in Melbourne. Thoroughly deserved to win, and Manly making the 8 is over now. They're finished for the season, in my opinion.
Dolphins versus Broncos. Now, Johnny, we all saw the promotions leading up to this game. It was dubbed the Battle of Brisbane. Well, mate, I've got another term for it. It should have been called the Bubble Bath of Brisbane. Mate, I do not know what these sides were actually doing, but it was closer to loofering each other's backs than tackling. Now, Johnny, I'm not so sure if loofering is a word, but neither was defence for the 80 minutes of this game. But the Broncos charged to a very improbable 24-0 lead. Let me just repeat that, 24-0 lead within 20 minutes. And then somehow they only led by 6 at the main break. And the score at the main break, JC, it was 30-24. Yeah, that's right. These two sides let in 54 points in the first half, over a point a minute. In the second half, the Finns finally woke up. They put on 3 tries to none and bested the Broncos by 8 points, 40-32. Rabbitohs versus Eels. In last week's round preview, you can probably remember this. I said that both of these teams were hopeless. Hopeless. Well, for the first 40 minutes of this game, Souths actually made a liar of me. They looked like a top 4 team. They came out and looked fantastic in the first stanza. Yeah. It seemed as though Alex Johnson actually scored 3 tries in about 3 minutes. Now, I am trying to piece together exactly what happened here, Johnny. I've got it from a few reliable sources. Mate, in the halftime address, Wayne Bennett, in that very laconic way of his, he actually said to the Rabbitohs, boys, we need to remember we are pretenders, not contenders. And voila, Johnny, mate, the red and green turned back into pumpkins for the second 40. Para almost clawed back a 28-point deficit. But luckily for Souths, this is Parramatta, with the opportunity of 2 attacking sets in the Souths red zone in the last 5 minutes. They showed yet again why they are sitting in the lower reaches of the competition. Raiders versus Knights. Okay, well, this was at the opposite end of the spectrum, mate. I don't know what people expected of this game, but whatever their expectations were, this encounter exceeded them. Mate, it looked like it was going to be a Newcastle training run. They scored 2 early, relatively innocuous tries in the first 10 minutes, but mate, Canberra turned the tide on a Jed Stewart intercept try. The game settled into an absorbing back and forth. It was interesting in the second half because both sides actually showed their relative strengths as well as their weaknesses. Newcastle, they showed their ability to score from anywhere, but also their disturbing tendency to go to sleep. The Raiders showed their grit, but also their inability to seal the deal. This ended up being a good hard-nosed win for the Novocastrians, and more than anything else, Johnny, how about their discovery of another second-row sensation? Mate, Francis Mane Leilua, he had a rampaging display. Mate, it was reminiscent of Lika Haliasima or Homole Olakawadu. Dragons versus the Sharks. Oh, Cronulla. Mate, just when we thought that there was something building, the boys from the Shire came out and delivered whatever that was. Mate, the tone for this game was set really early. The Sharks crossed for the first try. It was within 5 minutes of the opening whistle. And, mate, then Nico Hines stepped up to go for the conversion. Now, we've been talking about it all week, Johnny. His much publicised 33rd straight goal. And, mate, then he kicked it like he was me. It missed by about 10 metres. Mate, from that point, I mean, the choke was on. It looked like Nico was going back to his bad old ways. Mate, it settled into a bit of a back and forth. The Dragons got an unlikely halftime lead, and then finally they sealed the game on Setu Tu's 77th minute try. Now, Johnny, we have given this Big Red V team a lot of brickbats this season, but I'm going to give them a rap. And I'm going to particularly focus on Hamish Stewart. Now, he didn't quite announce himself. We all have known from the last season or so that he's a very good young footballer, but it certainly reinforced what everyone's thinking about him. He was capably supported by a lot of other players wearing the St George jersey. Gutho, of course, came with his usual 100% display. Ryan Couchman was mighty in defence, and Tyrell Sloan made everyone question yet again why the Dragons are letting him go. The Sharks, mate, they have a bit of work to do. The Finns are now well and truly on their knocker, and they need to struggle to get that all-important top 4 finish. Okay, Johnny, what caught your eye, mate? Plenty of things going on, but what made you sit up and take notice?
Look, outside of us doing our first ever live cross from a game for the show, what actually caught my eye, you sort of touched on it earlier, was actually the Battle of Brisbane, or as you called it, Noz, the Bubble Bath in Brisbane, the Broncos versus the Finns. Look, as we all saw, mate, did anyone actually tackle in this game? I couldn't believe what I was watching or seeing in the first half. So let me just sort of reiterate this again, and you touched on it before. 9 tries were scored across both teams. 54 points were scored in the first half alone. I'm sure I heard or read somewhere. Apparently, it's a record for the most points scored in the first half of an NRL game. Ezra Mann was absolutely unstoppable in the first half. He scored a hat trick with the Broncos leading 24 points to 0 at one stage, and then in the blink of an eye, how quickly things changed. Do you know that the Finns then scored 7 tries to 1, and as you highlighted before, they went on to win the game 40 points to 32. Clearly, there was no defence in this game. It was just high octane attack, and it was definitely enjoyable to watch. But look, I'm just not too sure if the Finns coach Wolf would be very happy with the Finns D, especially leading into the finals.
Mate, in relation to that game, it was vaguely reminiscent of those games of touch you used to play with a tennis ball in the schoolyard, where you'd often just let the other team score so you get the ball back. Mate, that was particularly the case with the Herbie Farnworth try. Mate, he picked the ball up, and it seemed like the entire Brisbane team just stopped. I wasn't entirely sure what I was watching. You're right, it was entertaining, but by the same token, it certainly wasn't something that Coach Wolf would have been watching and thinking, oh, this is great. Now, mate, I've got something else from what caught my eye, and it's something which we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks across rugby league, and that's Indigenous Round. A particular highlight of the round for me are the jerseys that they wear. The jerseys are often designed by Indigenous artists, local Indigenous artists. They have a bit of meaning behind them. And, mate, over the last couple of years, they've just gotten better and better. This year's batch were absolutely phenomenal. Now, mate, I begrudgingly narrowed it down to my favourite. It's even more begrudging because this team actually played against my team over the weekend and beat them. But, mate, my favourite jersey for Indigenous Round was the South jersey. Now, it's got a little bit of a story behind it, as all the jerseys do. It was designed by Katie Walker's uncle, Uncle Joe Walker, and mate, it was a tribute to this year's NAIDOC theme, which was 50 years of Deadly. Now, the jersey itself was wonderful, mate. It just absolutely popped. But, mate, the thing that really struck me, there was a wonderful touch at the bottom of the jerseys. Mate, if you look at the bottom of the South jerseys, they actually had the traditional totems for all of South's Indigenous players. So, mate, it included a sand goanna for Jack Whiten, a kangaroo and a shark for Latrell, a wedge-tail eagle for Tallis Duncan. There was a whale for Jaden Sullivan. And, mate, my personal favourite was a stingray for David Fafita from Badu Island in the Torres Strait. Mate, it was absolutely fantastic. Again, it was a very, very tough choice. There were plenty of other great jerseys. Mate, I loved the Dolphins jersey. It sort of had a stylised Dolphins tail. The Parramatta jersey was fantastic. Newcastle, Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. Mate, it was just fantastic. So, mate, well done to the NRL. Well done to the clubs. Well done to the players, but particularly to the artists. As I said, this is a real time for the artists to shine. And, mate, I just thought that the Indigenous jerseys really gave a fitting tribute to the great contribution that Indigenous players have made. Okay, now, Johnny, we are on to the Grapple. Now, Johnny, mate, this week, in the theme of deep thinking, mate, we're going to do a thought exercise. So this is a little bit like Einstein in the Swiss patent office coming up with the theory of relativity. It also is timely. A lot of teams are starting to build their rosters for 2027. We're hearing free agents being signed left, right and centre. A little bit earlier today, it actually came out that Brian Tor has actually signed with the PNG Chiefs for season 2028. So, mate, there's plenty of free agent signing going on around the place. But I mentioned the fact that this concept actually came from our mate Jimmy Vespa. So Jimmy actually sent this text last week. Hey, Noz, I've been thinking about footy too much. Not entirely sure what that means, Jimmy. That's impossible. But, mate, I was thinking about your topic next week about playing group. Good theoretical question would be, what 1 to 2 position is each club missing the most? If you had a genie in a bottle, which player would take a bottom 8 team to a top 8 team? So in terms of this concept, Johnny, we add 2 players to any club, 2 players who would make an impactful difference to that particular team. Now, I do have a few caveats to this, mate. It has to be a team in the bottom 8. So this is not a Johnny Jizzfest where you're going to add every good player that comes onto the market to the Chooks. That's actually our school WhatsApp thread. Mate, conversely, it isn't an excuse for me to beat myself up over the Eels. In fact, mate, we are banned. We are banned from talking about our own teams. You're going to be choosing one club and picking those 2 players who are going to make a difference. So, mate, lead us out.
Okay. Interesting concept. Thanks to Jimmy for the idea, and hope the recovery is going well. All right, mate. If it's okay, Noz, I'm going to choose your Eels now. Look, I'll start by saying, the Eels came into this season with some pretty high expectations, with plenty of people tipping them to make the top 8, especially after that nice run at the end of last year. But injuries and more injuries combined with some, probably key players just not playing their best football this season has obviously seen your boys seriously underperform this year. Yes, we've probably seen, the odd good game and the odd good half like we saw on the weekend in that second half against South. But look, let's be honest, overall it's been a pretty disappointing season. So I've picked two players who I reckon could have completely changed the Eels season. I've picked a back and I've picked a forward. So here's my choice. So in the back, I actually couldn't split Marky Mark or Herbie Farnworth. I reckon either of these guys would add so much to the Eels, and I'm not just talking about the flashy stuff. Both are incredibly strong athletes who give you those tough meaties coming out of your own end. Herbie obviously basically breaks tackles for a living, and Marky Mark, look, as we all know, if you want somebody to finish a try, whether it's in the air or at the end of a backline move with absolutely no room to work with, somehow this guy scores. So I reckon Eels fans would absolutely love either of them in their team. But my other player, and probably the more important one I would add, is Harry Grant. The number 9 position has definitely been an Achilles heel for the Eels now for a few years. Harry Grant would make an absolutely enormous difference to your attack, especially around the ruck. His service, obviously his decision-making, and those runs he makes when the markers are tired or just switched off for a second. Put Harry Grant and either Marky Mark or Herbie into your Eels side, and I reckon they're probably challenging for the top 8 this year. So, mate, what do you reckon, Noz?
Mate, I reckon if the Parramatta Power Brokers are listening to this, they'll probably decide to put in a call to Morgan Harper's agent. But that's how good our recruitment is. Oh, mate, God. Oh, God. But mate, I can dare to dream. I can dare to dream about Harry and Marky Mark with an eel badge on their chest, mate. Mate, I've gone for a slightly different team, and mate, that's the Manly Sea Eagles. Mate, this team has fascinated me this season. I know we've talked a lot about them. We've talked about Fosball, Fizzball, whatever has happened to them with their ups and downs. But, mate, I was actually thinking about those ups and downs. And I can recall back to their second round loss. You can probably remember this as well, Johnny. Mate, their second round loss to the Knights at Brookvale was one of the most listless and pathetic performances I've ever seen. Like, it was absolutely dreadful. And, mate, in the space of 3 weeks, they then went up to the sunny coast and they decimated a red-hot Dolphins team. Like, I still can recall watching that game. I think it was a Thursday night game, and I'm thinking, is this the same Manly team that played like 2 or 3 weeks ago and were just hopeless? And they were. But then they've actually gone back, mate. They've reverted to type. You mentioned it in speed rounds. Mate, they were flat out disgraceful against Melbourne on the weekends. Like, Melbourne weren't very good, but at least they were having a crack and they were throwing caution to the winds. Manly were just absolutely nowhere, mate. And it got me to thinking, mate, how can you go from being horrible to great and then back to horrible? With that in mind, I did a little bit of digging into the stats, and mate, the stats for the Manly Sea Eagles are really, really interesting. Mate, they paint the picture of a pretty good team. On average, they score 25 points a game. They concede 20. They're not sort of ill-disciplined. They aren't prone to giving away penalties. And, mate, their completion rate's also high. But, mate, the thing about this team is that there are wild fluctuations, and a lot of that is, surprise, surprise, related to their defence. Now, anyone that watches the great game of rugby league knows that defence is pretty much all about attitude. And, mate, that's certainly the case with this Manly team. When they win, they miss 15 to 20 tackles. When they lose, they miss 40 plus. So there is a twofold increase in the number of missed tackles. And, Johnny, mate, I've got a couple of players for them who I think would actually address not only their defensive insufficiencies, but also their insufficiencies between the ears. Mate, the first one's pretty obvious, Cam Murray. Now, as you talked about with Harry Grant and Marky Mark or Herbie, you add these blokes to any team and obviously they're going to get better. But, mate, Cam Murray would be a godsend for this Manly team. He'd stiffen their defensive resolve around the ruck. He'd give them a little bit of defensive mobility. Mate, a team with Cam Murray in it would certainly not miss 40-plus tackles. My second one. Now, mate, my second one's a little bit left of centre, and that's Clint Gutherson. Now, this one to me actually makes sense. Gutho was originally a Northern Beaches boy. He played his first season of first grade in the maroon and the white. Now, there's a few things about Gutho. He's lost a yard of pace. Mate, he has never, And I spent 10 years watching and appreciating his game at Parramatta, but he never was an attacking juggernaut. But, mate, he is a straight DAWG. Mate, he always gives 100%, Gutho. He gives 100% in training. Every single drill he goes a million miles an hour. He certainly gives 100% on the field. Mate, this Manly team has plenty of X factor. They've got X factor all over the park. But, mate, when they lose, mate, they just don't show any alpha factor. Mate, when they lose, they are straight betas. And, mate, that is what Gutho would bring. Gutho would just really stiffen them up. Yeah, he's not necessarily going to do your Billy Slater things at the back, but you know that he's going to just go hard at the ball every single time, and he's going to inspire his teammates. Now, Johnny, mate, I love this concept. I think we're going to trot it out again. It might be something that we can do at the end of the season when we're looking to while down those long hours between the grand final and round one. But I'd like to give you another shout out to Vessi. So thank you very much for the concept, Vessi. But Johnny, mate, it is enough talking about what ifs. Let's get to things that will never happen, and that's our weekly tips. What have you got for us, mate?
Okay, let's start with the Eels versus the Cowboys. Look, we mentioned it before, mate. The Eels were absolutely awful last start against South in that first half. They clearly forgot to tackle. But look, well done on the fight back in the second half, and probably should have won it, to be honest, in the end. I mentioned before, good to see the Cows bounce back and keep their top 8 hopes alive. I actually think the Cowboys will get the job done here. I wish, I had a different prediction here, Noz, but look, your boys just can't string an 80-minute performance together, and I think the Cows will win this one.
Mate, you will wish you had a different prediction when my Eels run roughshod over these Cowboys. And, mate, that is my big prediction for this week. Yeah, they were ordinary in the first half, Parramatta, but, mate, they play with intensity, and this Cowboys team has no intensity whatsoever. Mate, that Cowboys-Titans game was just absolutely lackluster. Mate, there was nothing going on. Mate, I may regret saying this, but, mate, I am very, very confidently throwing my lot in with my beloved Eels, mate. I think they're going to win and win quite comfortably.
Wow. Okay, stay tuned. All right, let's move to the Sharks versus the Raiders. Look, we've said this before. The Sharks, mate, they've been the form team of the last 10 to 12 weeks, except for the Dragons game on the weekend. I'm not sure what happened there. I started thinking, is Nico Hines getting the yips again? Not obviously the best time of the season to be getting that. The Raiders, well, look, they sort of blew it against the Knights with Big Red copping an almighty spray post-game from Ricky. Their finals chances are now dead. I reckon the Raiders will probably stay with them probably for the first half, but I just think in the second half I can see the Sharks taking control and probably scoring too many points. I think the Sharks will win. And look, they haven't lost too many games at Ocean Trout or whatever their bloody home ground is called these days. Here, the Sharks will win.
Mate, the bad news for the Sharks in this game is that the Raiders still think that they're actually a chance to make the semi-finals. So they're going to turn up, and I also think they match up well against this Sharks team. Mate, one of the big strengths of the Cronulla team is Fanua Blake's ability just to rumble forward, and I think the big front rowers, particularly Tarpany and Papali'i, they actually can sort of negate that a little bit. Mate, the Sharks, oh God. Like, when we think they're going well, then suddenly they just turn around and put in a shocker like they did on Sunday. I just think they have more to play for. And I do think they're a better team than the Raiders as well. I think it's going to be a close encounter, but I am, again, just throwing my lot in with the Sharks in this one, mate.
All right, let's move to Manly versus the Dolphins. As we mentioned before, mate, Manly were absolutely terrible against Melbourne last start, and clearly their chances of making the top 8 are now gone. We've also said this a few times, how quickly things can change, especially with Manly. The last 2 times these two sides met, I'm pretty sure Manly put on 50. On the Finns in pretty quick time. I think it was only Foz's second or third game in charge. Mate, and at that point, we're all saying Fosball was alive and well. Fast forward to now, and look, these two teams feel like they're heading in completely different directions. The Finns, as we said, did forget about tackling on the weekend against the Broncos, but I tell you what, this team can attack from anywhere on the field, and they can score a ton of tries. I'm going for the Finns to win this one.
But I got a question for you here, Johnny. Are the Seagulls now as bad as they were at the start of the season? They've had a 4-game stretch, which was just capped off by that dreadful performance against Melbourne, which is, in my opinion, as bad as what they dished up for the first 4 rounds of the year. Mate, that 3-year contract that they gave to Kieran Foran after 9 games, mate, it was always a stretch. It now looks like it is an absolute disaster. Now, I'm going to correct you in real time here as well, JC. Mate, that Manly victory against the Finns was Foran's first game. So, mate, he started off an absolute flyer and has just deteriorated since that point.
Wow.
In saying that, though, mate, I actually think that this game is going to be a little bit closer than people expect. The Sea Eagles match up pretty reasonably against the Dolphins, and particularly that Dolphins' tendency to not want to tackle anybody. I expect the Finns to win. They certainly have a little bit more attacking potency, but I think this is going to be a high-scoring, close encounter.
All right, let's go to the Knights versus the Titans. Look, I'll be up front. The Knights should win this one pretty comfortably. The Titans, they're another team. I honestly don't have too much to say about it at the moment. Every time I think they're sort of finally, I don't know, turning the corner and showing us something, mate, in the blink of an eye, they go backwards again. I think the Knights will win quite comfortably.
Mate, the interesting storyline about this game are just those yellow flags that are appearing for Newcastle. Mate, they did not handle Canberra's physicality very well last week. Canberra pretty much belted them for the last sort of 50 minutes of that game. They had to rely on their long-range attacking prowess. They also made quite a few mistakes, and they fell asleep more than a few times. So they're just the things that Newcastle have to address if they want to be a threat in the semi-finals. But the Titans, mate, I reckon Newcastle could play in their pajamas and still win against the Titans. The Titans are hopeless.
All right, let's move to a pretty good game and an important game. The Bulldogs versus the Rabbitohs. Look, I actually think this is going to be a cracker with obviously, both teams fighting for their sort of top 8 survival. South's last start, mate, that was a game of 2 halves. Unbelievable. I think you mentioned before, attacking display in the first half. Mate, then in the second half, they just went to sleep with the Eels roaring back. And as I said, I thought the Rabbitohs were quite lucky to hold on a fast-finishing Parramatta side. As for the Dogs, as I said earlier, I thought they were a tad unlucky against my boys last start. They certainly weren't perfect, but yeah, I thought they did enough to put themselves in a position to win that game. I think if the Dogs can clean up their handling errors and just defend, obviously, that very potent South left edge, I actually reckon the Dogs can win this one. I'm going for the Dogs in a tight one.
Mate, this one is from my mate Brendan at work. So he was the one that came up with the concept, which was completely false, that I was wearing that Bulldogs hat when I was wearing my blue Brooklyn hat. But mate, Brendan is a mad Bulldogs fan. He will really like this one. Mate, I think the Dogs are going to absolutely smash the Rabbitohs. I think they're going to roll them. Mate, this Rabbitohs team has no depth. They've got no substance to them. Mate, I actually think Canterbury are going to absolutely run over the top of them.
All right, Tigers versus the Dragons. Look, mate, I could be rude here and say who cares, but that might be a little bit harsh. So look, I'll keep it simple. I'll go with the home side. I'll go with the Tigers. These guys desperately need to break this losing streak they're on, and I just think they're due for a win. And I'm calling it now. Adam Dewey, man of the match, mate. Imagine that, Noz. So yeah, the Tigers to win.
But I actually think this is one of the easiest picks of the weekend. We have one team that's having a crack, showing some glimpses, picking up steam. We have another team that's inept, going backwards and pretty much kaput to the season. Mate, I will go for the first every single time. And, of course, the first team that I was talking about were the Dragons. That said, mate, I actually think your Adam Dewey call has a bit of validity to it. Mate, the Tigers have a bit more talent. they're also coming off the bye week, but they haven't turned up for weeks now. On recent evidence, I don't think they will. I actually think the Dragons may going to go against you on that one.
All right, let's move to the Broncos versus the Warriors. Look, you mentioned it before, and I mentioned it, mate. The Broncos are up 24-0 after 22 minutes against the Finns last week, and somehow these turkeys ended up bloody losing the game. The Warriors on the other hand, I mentioned before, mate. These guys are the real deal, and I actually thought they looked even better last week with Luke Metcalf back in the side. As I said, he just adds another very good dimension to their attack, and I just think he makes them an even more dangerous footy team. I think the Warriors, they continue their winning run, and look, they're eyeing a top 2 finish, and I think it's starting to look pretty good for the boys from New Zealand. So they're the Warriors to win. I think they're going to put some points on. I think they're going to win quite comfortably.
Well, mate, I just said about the Dragons Tigers game that it's the easiest pick of the weekend. I was wrong. This is actually the easiest pick of the weekend, mate. If the Broncos bring their loofers again, mate, they're going to absolutely get rolled as well. But I actually think the Broncos could bring out baseball bats and still get done in this game. But this is a very, very poor football team that's getting worse. The New Zealand Warriors, mate, they're going to be running into a Suncorp stadium that is going to be 3/4 Warriors fans. They've got that size, they've got that mobility, mate. They've got a little bit of blood in their eye. I think that they are going to absolutely smash Brisbane in this game.
All right, mate. Let's go to the what did you call it? Round of the game?
The round of the game, mate. The round of the game.
All right, let's go to the proper heading here. The game of the round. All right. It's Penrith versus the Roosters. Obviously, Penrith are playing at their home ground at the moment, which is over there in Parramatta. Look, this is the battle for top spot. And, a bit of, mate, here we go again with the Panthers. As you know, they've been our bloody bogey team for what feels like an eternity. I think we've only beaten them, maybe once or twice since 2020. But look, I generally think, mate, the Roosters won't get a better opportunity to beat Penrith than this Thursday night, especially obviously with Yo out. The last 4 to 6 weeks have been pretty scratchy from my boys, probably apart from that massive win over the Cowboys. But look, we've just always found a way to keep winning. I can't remember the last time we had a loss. And what's been pleasing over this sort of, patchy little period, it's actually been our defence. I actually think our defence has been fairly rock solid, and I actually think that would please Robbo enormously. So, look, I can't wait for Thursday night. Top spot is on the line in this battle between Penrith versus the Roosters. If the Roosters start controlling clearly and obviously, hold the ball, complete our sets, I actually think we're a damn good chance of getting the victory and going to the top of the ladder. So clearly I'm going for my Roosters, buddy.
Mate, you're going to be absolutely impossible if the Roosters go to the top of the competition ladder. I'm just calling that right now. In terms of Penrith, mate, that was a really interesting game last week in Auckland. Well, I think it's time to start worrying about the Panthers and their title tilt. Mate, they were overwhelmed in Auckland, and I haven't seen them overwhelmed now for the better part of 5 or 6 years, but those Warriors, particularly on that left edge, they ran roughshod over the Penrith Panthers. I don't know what the mail is about Isaiah Yeo. There was news coming out today that it might not be a season-ending injury, but I don't think he's actually starting, or I don't even think he's playing this week. And, mate, he's been the backbone of that side, along with Cleary, Moses Leota, Dylan Edwards. Mate, he has been one of the mainstays, and I think they're really going to miss him. The Chooks, yeah, mate, they were messy against the Dogs, but they just have so much potency, mate, that they can turn a game on a dime. But they've got attacking talent, and I really think that's going to get them across the line here. It is away from the cosy confines of Allianz, but I really like the way they're playing at the moment. Winning, even when they're not quite on song. As I mentioned, mate, I am going for the Chooks, but I'm not looking forward to next week because you'll be even more impossible than you are normally. Okay, now on to freeballing, mate. I mentioned the fact that it is my freeballing this week, and it is part 2 of my section about team building.
'Cause I'm free balling, yeah.
Now, I mentioned this when we had our previous section, Johnny. It's all about the players. Now, it is no surprise that great teams need great players. Mate, the 1996 Chicago Bulls were the 1996 Chicago Bulls because they had a certain player who wore the number 23. And, mate, in the same vein, the great league teams had the likes of Gasnier, Beatson, Sterling, Clyde, Langer, Slater. Mate, there's not one great team in any sport in any era that doesn't have great players. But the big question is, Johnny, is how do they get there? Now, first and foremost, it's really interesting looking at the makeup of these teams. Mate, they're often a collection of players who've come up through the junior ranks of that club. There's sometimes is a well-placed free agent signing or two. Often they're surprising. They're not necessarily superstars, but they're players that just complement the other players. And usually they've played together for a significant period of time. Now, that speaks to what we were talking about last time, Johnny, good recruitment and good management. But, mate, here's where it gets interesting because it is a little bit more complex than that. Mate, in terms of what brings together a great team, there's demographics, there's the signs of the times, and we're going to get to this at the end of this section, mate. Sometimes it's just pure dumb luck. Now, in the case of the Eels of the 80s, the Bulldogs of the 80s, the 90s Broncos, the 90s Raiders, the 2020s Penrith. Mate, you can even go back to the greatest team of them all, which was the Dragons in the 1960s. And, mate, it's often done on the background of a demographic explosion. So they're usually working class areas on the up. They're booming with young players. They're booming with population growth. That is, there's lots of young people growing up in those areas and coming up at the same time. Mate, the second thing, and this is something that I find particularly interesting, is that these teams are usually very uniquely fitted to their era. And it's usually shepherded by a great coach, by the likes of a Jack Gibson or a Warren Ryan or an Ivan Cleary. Mate, I'm going to use an example which is very, very close to my heart here, and that's the Parramatta Eels of the 1980s. Now, we've often talked about this, Johnny, how in the off-season we go back and we'll be watching games from the 70s and 80s. Mate, if you go back and watch football from that period of time, mate, it's often hard, and I mean hard-nosed tackling, hard-nosed running, just punctuated by brilliant attacking players. Now, momentum and field position don't really exist, and that's because there was a scrum at the end of every set, and if that scrum was in your own half, you'd actually got the feed and the loose head. So you see strange things like players on their own 30-yard line pick the ball up on the sixth tackle and run for about 3 metres from dummy half because they know there's going to be a scrum. Now, in terms of a team like Parramatta, that actually suited them perfectly in the 80s. Mate, they had tough, no-nonsense forwards. They could hold the line. And then you just threw the ball to the likes of Sterling, Kenny, Cronin, Ella, Groth, Price. Those players could actually strike from anywhere. Now, an interesting change actually came at the end of the 80s. That's when the rules changed. At the end of set, scrum actually became a handover. And momentum, ruck speed and athleticism became paramount. And, mate, that's where the Brisbane Broncos really came to the fore. They had massive mobile forwards. They had crafty playmakers like Langer and Walters who could really control the game and control field position. And then they just throw it out to their supersonic backs who were perfect for that era. And then, of course, we had the 2020 Panthers. Mate, in a game which is now press up on athleticism and fitness, mate, they've just got a constant stream of young talent coming through. But, Johnny, mate, I mentioned this at the beginning, sometimes it's actually just pure luck. Mate, whatever the demographics, whatever the recruitment strategy or the prevailing conditions, mate, there is no science. Indeed, there is no method at all as to whether or not a player will turn into a quality first grader or an all-time great. And, mate, regardless of what anybody says, no one really envisages or consciously manages what these players become. Now, I've got a question for you here, Johnny. Mate, I mentioned Michael Jordan at the top of this section. Mate, where was Michael Jordan drafted in the 1983 draft?
Jesus. No idea. Tell me.
Mate, he was drafted at number 3. So in terms of talent identification and people working out what players are going to become, mate, I always just point to that because if people knew what he was going to become, that is the absolute greatest of all time, mate, he would have been taken at number 1 and they would have actually done the rest of the draft the following week. He was that good. Mate, getting great players is literally like catching lightning in a bottle. Now, I'm going to belabor this point, Johnny. It is me and it is freeballing, so it is all about making a meal of it. But I'm going to use the example of Brett Kenny and Michael Buettner at Parramatta. Buettner was a decorated junior footballer. He came up through Westfield Sports High. He was a star in all the junior rep teams. That actually culminated in him playing in the Aussie schoolboys team. Mate, Brett Kenny did not make any junior rep teams. In fact, he came up sort of tossing between baseball and rugby league. He actually just happened to turn up to a President's Cup trial. He played really, really well, was subsequently rushed into the under-23s and then made his first grade debut at the age of 19 in 1980. Now, there are a few other factors there as well, Johnny. Butner stepped into a Parramatta team in decline. Kenny stepped into a Parramatta team that was on the rise. In fact, one of the greatest rises of all time. But most of all, Brett Kenny was Brett Kenny. Mate, this was literally 1 in a million stuff in the same vein as Gaznia, Bradley Clyde, Billy Slater. Mate, there's no rhyme. There's no reason. I don't think any of the recruitment agents can pat themselves on the back. It's literally like just having a winning lottery ticket. So, Johnny, there we are. It's all about the players and team building. I'm sure I've left plenty of stuff out. So if you want to give us your take on that, hit us up at our email site. So noz@nrloffside.com, jc@nrloffside.com. It'd be great to get your guys' feedback on what you think makes a great team. Okay, Johnny, now we are onto the outro. It has been a very long show. I'm just looking at the time. But, mate, we've got a very important update on Vox Popping this week. Mate, the Cold War between Asher and myself has officially thawed. Mate, I am thrilled about this. He wrote this to you this week. Just listen to last week's episode. I have nothing bad to say to Noz. He's right. We are completely hopeless. Mate, this actually reminds me of the end of Casablanca, where Rick and Captain Reynolds said, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. So, mate, me and Asher, just like that. Mate, what have you got for us?
From my side, quick shout out to our good mate Stuart Otto from school, who listens to our podcast every week. Hear this? Whilst he's tackling the famous South Coogee steps or stairs, all 225 of them, obviously one way. Apparently, this is what Stu said to us. He said to me, he reckons that the soothing sounds of listening to Noz and you, JC, help keep him motivated as he battles his way up and down those bloody stairs. So, look, Stu, we absolutely love that you're tuning in every week, particularly under such extreme conditions. But mate, I really should add, I'm not sure what's worse, doing the 225 stairs or listening to Noz and me crap on for an hour or so. Look, but thanks for listening, and keep smashing those stairs. I'm expecting sub 4 minutes per set, Stu. Well done, mate.
Mate, no, I'm sure you'll be able to do that and do that probably on his head. And knowing this program, you'll probably be able to do the stairs about 12 times for the duration of today's show. Now, we have come to the end of the program, guys. I mentioned the fact that we do have our email addresses, so jc@nrloffside.com, noz@nrloffside.com. Send through your thoughts. Again, we've had a couple of interesting topics today on the grapple and also talking about team building, so it'd be great to get people's opinion on those. Also, subscribe, which we talked about at the top of the program as well, guys. Get onto our socials, Instagram @NRL_offside, TikTok @NRLoffside. Plenty of exciting content going up in the 7 days between shows. It'd be great to be able to interact with our listeners in that way as well. But again, guys, thank you very much for listening this week. We very much look forward to seeing you next week.
Stay well, listeners, and catch you next week. Bye-bye for now.